Welcome to FACT's webinar called Tall Grass Grazing, Transitioning Off of Nitrogen Fertilizer. Our presenter today is Dave Scott with NCAT and ATTRA. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating today's session. So now, before we dive into the presentation itself, I do have just a very few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, we are a national nonprofit organization that's headquartered in Illinois. We promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Humane Farming Program, which provides a variety of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about all of our farmer services, including our upcoming webinars and our Fund to Farmer grant program. We are currently accepting applications for our next round of grants, and the application deadline is December 2nd. So at this time, I'm very pleased to introduce our expert presenter, Dave Scott. Dave is a livestock specialist with NCAT and ATTRA. Dave and his wife, Jenny, run 200 ewes and their lambs on 32 acres of irrigated acres in southwest Montana. We're very lucky to have him with us to share his experience and insight on the topic of tall grass grazing and reducing chemical inputs. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dave so that he may begin his presentation. Dave, please take it away.
Okay, well, howdy everybody. Can you hear me? Larissa, am I on the air?
You are loud and clear.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank Larissa first off for inviting me to join you folks today. It's just going to be a very great experience for me, and I hope that we all together can accomplish something here. Let's see, Larissa, I don't think I can advance. Okay, there we go. So the title of our little visit is going to be Tall Grass Grazing and How to Transition Off of Fertilizer. And before we get right down into it, I just want to put a little plug for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, or NCAT, and its outreach program, which is called ATTRA. We have over 300 hard copy and digital publications that you can download the digital publications right off our website. It's attra.ncat.org, or all you have to do is remember to Google ATTRA and it'll come up. They range from a whole host of topics, from farm energy to cattle, sheep, goats, health, grazing. There's just a ton of topics. And so one that I'm going to single out today because it deals directly with what we're going to be talking about is nutrient cycling in pastures. And this is a relatively new publication. It was only published about a year and a half ago, and it is a good background piece for what we're going to talk today. So if you have any questions, first of all, send me your questions and I will get some answers in one way, form, or another back to you. Whether if I know the answer, I will certainly tell you. And if I don't know the answer, I'll go hunting it for you. So, but this publication, Nutrient Cycling in Pastures, should be a good background piece. So, about almost 40 years ago, which really dates me, I realize that. But we started farming in Whitehall, Montana, and for about 32 of those almost 40 years, I was a firm believer in if you had to get a lot of grass production, you were going to have to fertilize. There's just no question about it. And I did so for all that time. We ran dairy cows and sheep in those 32 years, and one thing that really convinced me of this is every time when I stopped fertilizing midway through the summer, the grass stopped growing, and so it pretty much confirmed what my brother-in-law, who's an agronomist for Simplot Association, has been telling me all along. If you want grass and lots of it, you got to put down in. However, about in 2013, we were constantly looking at our bottom line, and one thing really stood out to us every year was the amount that we were paying for fertilizer. we generally, or we did every year for 30 some years, we put down 160 units of actual N per acre. And that cost us between $125 and $155 an acre, depending on how bad the price was. So what happened in 2013 is I ran into two people at conferences. One was Gabe Brown, who you guys might have come in contact with from videos or a podcast or maybe a conference. You might have heard him. And the other one was Christine Jones, Dr. Christine Jones from Australia. And I met them at conferences, and they pretty much changed our farm's direction. And so in 2014, we transitioned off of that 160 units of N to 0 in 4 years. And along the way, we picked up some savings in irrigation. And I see, at least on the preliminary survey, we don't have any people that irrigate that are listening today, but there's a lot of people with 30 inches or more. And so this pretty much applies to you. What we're going to be talking about. The only difference is with irrigation, you can selectively apply water when you need it, like say in July or August, whereas possibly if you're in a 30 or 40 inch precip zone, that may not be a choice open to you. But the principles and the parts of the systems that we're going to be talking about today will conserve moisture in your soil, so it really applies in that sense. So at the same time, we were transitioning, we did not lose any grass production. In fact, we gained production. And that is still just kind of blows me away, but it's happened for 3 years now, so I'm going to have to accept it. And we did lose a little bit of lamb production, not very much, from 0.6 pounds per day per lamb to 0.62 pounds per day per lamb over a 100-day period where they're on the ewe. That amounted to about $1,300 or $1,400 at $1.80 a pound. So it was something that we gave up, but as I hope to show you throughout the webinar here, we gained a lot more financially, much more than overcame that. So just as a background, from about 1982 to 2013, we were grazing about 12,000 pounds or 6 tons of dry matter per acre. And in the years 2017 through 2019, we had 14,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. And how we measure this is from the good old NRCS hoops, where you throw a hoop down that's a certain circumference, and you clip everything inside that hoop, and then you weigh it in grams, and then there's a formula associated with the hoop that tells you how many pounds of dry matter per acre are in that field that you just sampled. So that's how we do that, and we run hoops every 5 days during the summer, and that's how we get how much production we have, because we're leaving behind a lot of trampled grass, and actually the sheep are only eating about 1/2 of the dry matter that's actually there. So in order to somewhat correctly gauge the dry matter there, we have to have a hoop system. Let's see, Larissa, I don't think I'm advancing. Okay, here we go. So what is tall grass? That's a great question, and it's going to have a bit of a different answer no matter wherever you are in the country. For us, tall grass, we have come to define it for our farm as full recovery. The grass has to fully recover from a grazing event plus 14 days. And on the bottom of this slide here, it shows you how to tell when a grass is fully recovered. And for a long time, I read in the publications and magazines that you needed to let your grass fully recover before you regraze it. And I always wondered what in the world they were talking about. How do you tell when a grass is fully recovered? And then, for kind of secondhand from Greg Judy down in Missouri, I learned 10 years ago, this is how you do it. You just take a stem, of any particular point in the grass, and it's got 3, 4, maybe 5 leaves. And you look at that bottom leaf, that basal leaf, and if it's brown, or if the tip of it, maybe 1 or 2 inches of the tip is brown, that's the signal a grass plant is telling you that that grass is fully recovered and it's ready to graze again. So we've used this little tip for about 10 years now, and it works very well. For cool season grasses, and in Montana, we do not have any warm season grasses, so I can't really say about that. But since Greg Judy is in Missouri, there's lots of warm season grasses in Missouri. I'm going to assume that it works for warm season grasses too. This is a little trick that you're probably not going to find at your local NRCS service center. So I just wanted to pass that on. And so we're using 14 days in addition to the time it takes for full recovery. And the neat thing about this full recovery thing is it's almost like clockwork in an irrigated system. When you can apply the moisture that you need, and you have sunshine, and you have plant nutrients in the soil that aren't limiting, it takes 28 to 32 days or 30 days, bing, 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 after a grazing event to fully recover. If the sun goes behind the clouds in June for us, or it gets cold, that might extend out to 32 or 34 days. But these plants they're like little machines as far as recovering. They're just almost like clockwork. So why did we choose 14 days? It just kind of was something we picked out of the air when we decided to try regenerative grazing and get off the nitrogen bandwagon. We figured that we needed to allow those grass plants more time to photosynthesize, and we just picked 42 days and ran with it and saw what it did. So how is this tall grass actually enabling our grazing system and our plants to grow without any fertilizer? And this is really essential. And it's something I try to keep in my mind every day during the grazing season when I'm moving sheep, and also during the winter when I'm planning our grazing. Uh, Tall grass provides more root exudates, and a grass plant is doing a couple things when it photosynthesizes. The first thing it's doing is it's providing sugars to produce more leaves, to produce more stems, and it's growing more roots with those same sugars. But the neat thing that really we haven't realized, except for the last maybe 10 or 12 years, is it's pushing out sugars and sugary protein like substances out of those roots, which is really you go, now why in the world would a grass plant do that? And sometimes it's up to 60% of all the sugars it produces through photosynthesis are going out in root exudates. So you wonder, now why in the world would a plant do that? It's just losing maybe what it photosynthesized. But the deal is, it's a deal. The plant is saying through a bunch of biochemical communications, it's telling bacteria, fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, it's saying to them, okay, I've got a sugar here, and it's dangling right in front of your nose, and I know you need it, because all those microbes, they live on carbon, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks in between. So I, the plant, know that you need this, but I need nitrogen, say, or I need selenium, or I need phosphorus, or I need arsenic, or I need this or that, some of the 280 some known plant essential nutrients. I need one of those. So you go get me one of those things, and I will give you this sugar molecule. So it's like the gangster scene in Chicago. It's the big deal, the Trump deal. You might think of it as that. I'm the plant. I'm going to give you something, but you got to give me something I need first. So that's how, in a pasture or any kind of plant ecosystem, that's how plants direct the whole symphony of nutrient cycling. And it's really a vast, vast field, and You might say it's infinitely complex. The more that soil microbiologists learn about this, the more they are astounded by it. And so nature has created a huge symphony down here in the roots of the soil, and we are taking advantage of that symphony and through regenerative grazing. The other way that we can feed soil microbes through tall grass grazing is we can trample a portion of that grass so it's laying flat down on the soil and the microbes can access it when it's within their reach, and they digest the sugars and the carbon and the nutrients that are in that grass, and it feeds them that way. So we have two pathways to feed microbes in the soil. One is through photosynthesis, or Christine Jones calls that the liquid carbon pathway. And two is the pathway of decomposition from the canopy that we trample. So this is how it works down there. Let's just say we have, first of all, we have to realize that there's plenty of raw nutrients in the soil. We've got a whole crust of the earth full of raw nutrients. Now, that may not be something that your local fertilizer guy is going to tell you, but it's true. We have no lack for raw nutrients. We have 70%, some 70% of the nitrogen is in the air. And if we can somehow just get that nitrogen to diffuse into our soils and for the microbes to convert it from gaseous nitrogen to nitrates or ammonia, we're set. And this is a short diagram here about how it sort of works. Let's just say we have a protein in the soil that's running around, or a nitrogen, any form of nitrogen in the soil that's dissolved in the soil water. It's eaten, just say in this case, by a bacteria, and that bacteria it has all kinds of ways through enzymes and different kind of strategies to get that nitrogen through its cell wall. And once it gets in that cell wall, it stays there. There's no way that nitrogen can get out of that bacteria unless somebody like a protozoa comes along and eats that bacteria. And bacteria have the highest concentration of nitrogen than any other organism. And so when protozoa comes along, he metabolizes that bacteria and the nitrogen that's in that bacteria, and he ends up with a lot more nitrogen than he needs. So he has two options. He can either die from having too much nitrogen in his body system, or he can poop it out. And that's exactly what he does. He poops the extra nitrogen out. And it just so happens that the form that he excretes that nitrogen, that extra nitrogen, is in the form of a plant available chemical, such as nitrate, ammonia, or amino acids, short chains, or short chain proteins. So this is the whole system that nature uses. Uh, it can happen if a protozoa eats a fungi too. The same thing happens, or nematodes. If nematodes eat bacteria or fungi, this is what happens, and this is what product you get. You get plant available nutrients. So it's basically four classes. If you really want to make really broad terms, like farmers like myself are really we like putting things simple. It's two classes of immobilizers and grabbers of nutrients, and they immobilize them in their cells, and then the predators come along, the protozoa and the nematodes. They eat those immobilizers and release those plant available nutrients. Again, the ATTRA publication, Nutrient Cycling in Pastures, that is a free download. I really encourage you to download that from our site, because this will go into more detail.
So Dave, the slide did progress. I
Oh,
know
did
that
it?
Yes, I
Okay,
know
now I'm seeing it.
that there are
Okay.
several people that are also having the same issue of just having things be lagged. So Dave is among people that are not having the slides work perhaps as quickly as we'd like.
Okay. Well, we'll just wait. That's fine with us. Um, So the next slide is on nutrient cycling, and this just kind of demonstrates it on the ground of just what we were talking about there with the bacteria and the fungi, the nematodes and the protozoa. This picture on June 8th was taken right after we had grazed a paddock. In this field of view in this picture, there are actually about 3 paddocks, and they were all grazed for 1 day, and they had about 600 sheep on them for 24 hours. Going into the paddock, there was about 7 to 8,000 pounds of dry matter. Think of it as grass that was almost 5 feet tall, and because of the stocking density, that many sheep on a small area of that pasture, what they didn't eat, they trampled. And so we fast forward now to October 7th. That's what, almost 4 months forward. I just took this picture the other day. And look what happened. Where'd the grass go? It's not there anymore. And the answer is the bugs ate it. And they ate that particular grazing sessions of grass that was laid down flat and trampled. And then they ate another grazing event. And then they ate a third grazing event. And as you can see in the bottom picture here, the layers of grass there's only a little bit, this small brown grass here. That is all that remains from, gosh, you might say pretty close to in some areas, 3 to 4,000 pounds of dry matter, and in others, close to 7 or 8,000 pounds of dry matter that's been trampled. So when we see this in our pastures, when we dig down in at the end of the grazing season and we see very little grass there, and what we do see is colored a nice chocolate brown, we know that nutrients are being cycled in our pasture. This is a beautiful sight to behold. And this is what they do. They build houses in the soil. That's what microbes do. And the houses, we can see them in a clump of soil by the aggregation. It's little clumps of cottage cheese here. And this is our daughter instructing her little niece about soil. She wanted to start Ruthie early. And you can see that Ruthie is not quite sure about this whole project, but that's a picture of soil that has very good aggregation. And notice the color too. Uh, soil that is functioning for you has the same color as your chocolate Hershey candy bar wrapper, that classic dark chocolate brown wrapper. It hasn't changed for at least 50 years that I know of anyway. And so you can always, when you dig up a spadeful of soil, if it's that dark chocolate brown, your soil that's one indication that it's functioning for you. And I might add too, while the slide is changing, that that's a shovel is one of my best monitoring tools. I go to different places on our pasture and I just dig up a spadeful and I examine it. Is it that nice brown color? Does it have aggregation to it? You can take an infiltration ring, which is just a 6-inch ring of steel, and pound it into the ground, and then add an inch of water over that, and time how long it takes for it to infiltrate that water. Good soil will infiltrate an inch of water in about a minute's time. I should say excellent soil will. And then soil that needs improvement, it might take 45 minutes to infiltrate an inch of water. So a spade and an infiltration ring and visual color and smell. If it smells a nice, you know, nice topsoil type, sweet smelling smell, that means you've got a functioning soil. Okay, then I just wanted to talk a little bit, let you know that I'm communicating through you today through our farm. I don't want to put our farm in any particular place. This could be your farm. This could be your neighbor's farm. It could be my neighbor's farm. It could be a farm 1,000 miles away from me. And the reason is because all of our farms have one thing in common, and that is nature. And so all we're doing in applying principles of regenerative grazing and getting off of end fertilizing, we're just mimicking nature. So keep that in mind as we go through. Our farm is about 4,200 feet. We have a 90+ day growing season. We have 7 months of grazing. And as you can see in the bottom slide here, we are kind of in the mountains in southwest Montana. And so given that, we are kind of subject to varying degrees of weather extremes. We can have snow any month out of the year. And we can also be fairly warm, but probably not so warm as a lot of you guys are. If we get 7 to 10 days of 90-degree temperatures, we think we are burning up. So, um, since we are at 4,200 feet, we do have cooler temperatures, which gives us a tremendous opportunity to grow cool season grasses. Um, this picture was taken June 6th of this year, and it just kind of goes to show you that we can have changes in the weather. The snow line on this particular day was at about 7,000 feet, and we were freezing. In this particular time, we took this picture, and that night it got, probably down to around 22 or so. So not really conducive temperatures to grow grass, but it just kind of sets the stage. Brief history, from 82 to 2003, we are a forage-based grazing dairy. We did feed grain to our cows, and that time we operated under a totally different farming philosophy, you might say. Is what that was is if we could get a pound extra out of our cows of milk per day, we went after it. I was educated in a dairy program at Washington State University, and um, what they basically told us was, if you can get an extra pound out of a cow, don't worry about the expenses because it'll pay for itself. Well, it did back then, but today, one of the things I really want to emphasize, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, is it's not so anymore. Um, in order to be profitable, we have to look at the other side of the equation and figure out ways that we can reduce our expenses, because we cannot produce our way into a profit anymore. So from 2009 to 2004 to 2009, uh, we sold the cows in 2003, mainly because our kids grew up and went to school, and we figured out pretty fast they did a lot more on the dairy than we ever probably gave them credit for. And also, we figured out that we'd probably never see our kids again if we kept milking cows. So we, because with milk cows, you have a 5-hour leash. And so between milkings, and so with just mom and dad doing the chores, we were pretty much stuck and married to those cows, and we loved the dairy cows, but we decided that our kids were more important to us. And so we sold them in 2003. We bought about 180 ewes, and we just kept, for the first 5 years, we just kept our same grazing system as the milk cows. We figured if it's good enough for a milk cow, it's certainly good enough for a ewe. And actually, we could not have been more wrong. Um, after about 5 years of grazing sheep in that manner with just 22 days of rest, we figured out we were really setting ourselves up for internal parasites, in particular the barber pole worm. And also, that grass was just too hot protein wise in order to get good gain on lambs. It's just too washy. We get a lot of soiled butts on those lambs, and that created problems like fly strike, and it was just kind of a chronic wreck. And so finally, in 2010, after the barber pole worm was eating us alive, I went and called around the southeast and the northeast part of the United States, and I asked them how they were grazing to limit the barber pole worm. And one of the the things that everybody says is you've got to have at least 30 days of rest in your pastures. So we went to 32 days of rest, and that really, really helped. And then, as we've always talked about, in 2014, we decided to transition to a regenerative grazing system and its benefits. And so we just went to 42 days of pasture rest at that time. Okay, here's just a short little summary of our facts of our flock. We have 150-pound mature weight ewes. They're polypay ewes. They're a 4-way cross. It was developed at the U.S. Sheep Station in DuBois, Idaho. We do feed them a pound of grain the last 45 days of gestation. We expect close to 200% lamb drop. And we found out the hard way, if we don't feed them a pound of grain the last 45 days of gestation, we get weak lambs, and it's really a bad deal. We also feed a pound a day 17 days before breeding during the flushing period. Our grass is basically pastured for 7 months, and we get about 7 tons of dry matter per acre on the farm. And then we also have 2 months of grazing leafy spurge, which is off the farm. Leafy spurge is a noxious weed. Cattle will not eat it. Sheep love it, and it has about a 25-foot root, and so you cannot spray it out. Um, you cannot graze it out, but you can really limit it by either spraying it or grazing it with sheep or goats. A lot of landowners these days are not really that interested in spraying the spurge, and so they are interested in sheep or goats coming and eating it, and we provide that service. So the ewes are gone for about 2 months, from about August 1 to October 1, and then just all our lambs are direct marketed. We've been direct marketing for about 10 years now and been very fortunate to have a market that likes our lambs. So the seasons we've talked a little bit about. We've got 4 months of active grazing, and we graze winter stockpile for about 3 months, and then we have old man winter for about 5 months. Some of those 5 months we're grazing grass, and it looks like this. There might be a foot or a foot and a half of snow. Our sheep can easily eat through a foot and a half of snow. We expect them to, and they also do not need any water if they're eating snow. So it really makes things nice for us. Sheep are incredibly adapted to Montana, and we try to take advantage of that adaptation. So here's our grazing schedule from last year, or this year. May 17th, we had a really cold spring last year. We waited till the 17th to turn out. August 1st, we weaned. That gave us about 100 days on the ewe because we lamb in April 1. August 28th, the lambs came off grass. The ewes went to custom graze weeds August 1st. About the first week in October, the ewes returned to graze our stockpiled pasture. We breed on the grass, and around January 10th, we expect to graze out our winter stockpile. So this is just a brief reminder of our stocking density throughout the active part of the grazing season. We move every day, and we have about 600 total sheep per acre. That's called stocking density, not to be confused with stocking rate. So stocking rate is the amount of ewes or sheep that you can run the whole grazing season. Stocking density is the number of sheep or number of cows that you have per acre at any given time that you're grazing. And since we move every day, there's about 480 sheep, total sheep on about 3/4 of an acre, and that works out to about 600 total sheep per acre, or little over 6 ewes per acre. So now I want to just kind of introduce the concept of gross margin. We can use a gross margin to just compare 2 different ways of doing things on the same farm. And this is what we how we monitored and analyzed if we were doing, if we were making actually some better money at regenerative grazing or tall grass grazing than our old way of shorter grass grazing. And so I won't go through this really slow, or really fast, but we have about 1.7 lambs per exposed ewe. We usually lose about 10% of them, mostly during the first week of lambing. And after the end of 100 days, we have a 70-pound average lamb, which converts to about 120 pounds of lamb per exposed ewe. At $1.65 a pound, that's just under $200 per ewe. And in 2018, which is the year that we had these figures calculated out, that worked out to about 5.6 ewes per acre, or a little under $1,100 per acre of gross receipts. And gross margin, all it is your gross receipts minus your out-of-pocket expenses. Doesn't include anything like depreciation or anything like that. And you can isolate it on a particular enterprise. So we're isolating this gross margin comparison on our pasture enterprise only. Now we look at our costs. This is the old way we used to do it. It was with 18-inch grass, 22 days of rest, and we moved daily. You can see our cost for irrigation power per acre, 114, fertilizers, 122 that year. Fencing labor for moving the fences every day was about 3/4 of an hour a day for 120 days. That's $56 to the acre. Irrigation labor, we move hand line in addition to a couple pivots. And so that's why that figure isn't totally out of sight. If we were moving hand lines on all 32 acres, it would cost us more for labor. I charge myself $20 an hour. And so our gross income per acre, if you take out-of-pocket expenses from in-pocket revenue, is $618. If you add in the value of the stockpile per acre, it increases by $69. So what you end up with on our old system, on the average, we had $618 of gross margin for the lamb production and $69 of acre to the acre for the stockpiled grass production, giving us a total gross margin per acre of $680. Now let's compare it to 30-inch grass, which we're doing now, 42 days of rest. We're moving daily. Our irrigation power is basically 3/4 of that of our old system. Our fertilizer has been reduced to 0 per acre. Our fencing labor is the same. We're still moving once a day. And our irrigation labor is reduced by about 1/4. So we're now looking at $280 per acre in costs. We're taking the same gross income per acre. We're still able to run the same amount of ewes, and we're running about the same amount of lambs on their sides. So our gross margin for the lambs is just revenue minus expenses, out-of-pocket expenses. That's $800+ And our gross margin for stockpiled grass has increased now because we are grazing taller grass all season long. And so when we stop grazing the first week in September, what we have there for a grazing wedge, and a grazing wedge is everything from where you stopped grazing the last day all the way around your pasture to where you would go next, if you did go next into the next paddock. So it ranges from about 2,000 pounds to the acre of dry matter to close to 7,000 pounds of dry matter. That's what we have to graze during the fall and the winter. And I just ran these figures out for 200 head at 5 pounds a day. It costs us $140 a ton for hay, and times we are now getting 90 days, whereas before we only got 90 days with 70, or excuse me, we got 70 days with 90 head. So we're running a lot more sheep days on our winter pasture, and that has been a huge benefit to tall grass grazing. Than when we started, we didn't even think about that. But that's what happens. A lot of good things happen sometimes that you don't think about. So if you compare the two, add everything up, As soon as this slide changes, we'll see that. So in our tall grass grazing system, we ended up with $1,000 of gross margin per acre. And this picture shows you towards the end of the first cycle of grazing, how tall that grass can get. And I know what you're thinking. Boy, that's pretty mature, rough grass, right? Yeah, that's what I think too, but I'm thinking different now. So anyway, we've got a comparison with a fertilized field of just under $700 an acre, or what I call the soil health system of $1,000 an acre. So it's an easy choice for us to take. And one thing I really want to emphasize again, it's not that we have increased our production. We've actually lessened our production a little bit. We lost a little bit of gain per lamb on our weaning weights, but we've just knocked out so much expenses. $300 per acre of expenses that we are no longer spending, and that's what's affecting this bottom line, and it makes me just quite happy. So $1,000 an acre gross margin per acre. What will take for a sheep operation? Probably about 180% drop, a long rest period, high stock density, and managed exit residual. Let's go and look at those just a little bit. The bottom left-hand picture is typically what we run on our paddocks. That's how many sheep there are in there, and the paddock that irrigation pivot's running on there, that's where they were yesterday and the day before. Gives you kind of an idea of what's going on. So long rest period. We've already talked about. We just picked 42 days out of the hat, you might say, and just decided to try it. This is what it looks like. June 7th. We were on grass that was about 3,500 pounds of dry matter per acre, measured by hoops again. 42 days later, excuse me, July 18th, we had about 5,700 pounds of dry matter per acre. So that's one of the things that we try to keep constant on an irrigated system of ours is every paddock that we go into with the sheep, a new paddock, it's been rested for 42 days. If something happens, like if the grass doesn't grow quite as well, if we don't have the sunshine or something, uh, we will actually, if we get down to about 38 days, 39 days, we'll put those sheep out into the corral, which is conveniently located on one side of the pasture, and we'll feed them hay for 2 or 3 days, just so we can maintain our 42-day rest period. Because not only is that maintaining the grazing wedge, it's also maintaining what we have 2 months from now in July to graze for fall and winter pasture.
So, Dave, while you're waiting for the slide to load, we did get a question about if you'd explain the difference between stocking rate and stocking density again.
You bet. Stocking rate is defined as the amount of, in our case, ewes that we can run over the whole grazing period. For example, say we have, for easy figuring, 200 ewes and we run them on 30 acres, say. We're running um, about six ewes per acre stocking rate. That's over the whole season. But stocking density, which is really important to distinguish from stocking rate, is how many ewes we're running per acre, just on an acre basis, over at any given time. So you can determine it in terms of ewes or total sheep. So the stocking density of at any given point in our pasture season, any given day, we are running about 200 ewes or 180 ewes and 280, 290 lambs. So if you add those up, it's about 470 total sheep, and it's on 3/4 of an acre. So when you convert it to an acre basis, it's about 600 total sheep per acre, and that's your density. And it's really important because if you don't have a density that's that high, then you you cannot trample the grass well enough to make it lay flat uh, on the ground so the microbes can eat it. Uh, so the sheep go through and select it. I'm going to hit this again, Larissa. Yeah, okay. So they go through, and this is a good picture demonstrating that they are eating, they're not eating the whole plant here. They are eating the leaves off that plant and some of the stems that are pretty mature and lignified to satisfy their crude fiber requirement. My great grandfather was a sheep producer in Indiana. And if he could see this picture now, he would say, "What in the world are you doing?" you know? And I have to admit, several years ago, I would have said the same thing. But we're actually making money in this. And that's my answer today. We're going to demonstrate here. This is another picture of that tall grass. Uh, I noticed that the sheep were eating just mostly the leaves. Picture on the right here shows you a lot of stems sticking up with, and they've just been stripped of their leaves. So I went and collected a whole bunch of leaves, put them in a bag, sent them off to a forage lab, testing lab. It came back 59% TDN, 17% crude protein, and then of course we had that average daily gain. And this is why we didn't drop too much in average daily gain, because it kept those lactating ewes. They had enough energy and crude protein in the ration to support two lambs on their side. So it's not necessary. If you were to take the whole plant, cut it off, the whole plant, and send it to that forage testing lab, you would probably end up with 9 to 10% crude protein instead of 17, and your TDN would be below 50. So this is the neat thing about sheep. They're very selective eaters, and I just love sheep to have that property of them. So it's not necessarily true that tall grass grazing, you're going to lose a lot of gain, excuse me, because of the nutrition in the grass isn't there, because the sheep are going to select what they want to eat, and they'll gain well for you. You might see here too, there's a thistle in the right hand picture there that's growing, and look how they've pretty much denuded that thistle. When you have high stock densities, either cows or sheep, they realize that if a one particular cow or one particular sheep avoids a certain plant and doesn't eat it, their neighbor's gonna. And so it puts a lot of pressure on them. And that's why you can get them to eat weeds, you can get them to trample grass. Get this again. This picture on the left was taken right when we turned the sheep into a paddock, maybe only an hour after we turned them in. You can see there's a lot of grass there. 24 hours later, it's going to look like the picture on the right. Some stems sticking up and a lot of stems trampled. You can kind of see why Montana is called the big sky country. There's a lot of blue in the sky, and it's a big, big sky. We're also really blessed with long sunshiny days, and so that helps cool season grass grow. Here's another example of when I took just the leaves and sent them off to a forage lab. This is on June 8th of this year. You can see this grass has been, we started on May 17th. So it's been about 30 days into the grazing cycle. TDN was 70%. Look what crude protein was, 30% in the leaves. This is what it looks like after they've grazed it off for 24 hours. You can see there's a lot of stems there. A bunch of stems are 8, but almost all the leaves are 8, and some stems after 24 hours. So we're just letting these ewes and the lambs, mostly the ewes at this stage of growth in the lambs, we're just letting them eat what they want to. And they are very capable of balancing their own ration. Don't even have to do it for them. Another thing I wanted to point out, if you look at all those lambs there, or all the sheep in general, you don't see any pooey butts. There's no soiled butts in there, which is what we would have lots of soiled butts if we are grazing short grass. That was one of our major problems. And later on in the season, when it got hotter, we were very susceptible to fly strike, and I do not miss having to manage for fly strike at all. We haven't had any fly strike since we went to tall grass grazing. And the reason is because the grass is not so lush that it doesn't go through them anymore. The rate of passage is just slowed down. Right. Okay, here we go. This is what you need in a tall grass grazing system is high stock density with the 485 head on 3/4 of an acre. It's about 70,000 pounds per acre. If you're running cattle, you probably want to up that around to 200,000 live weight pounds per acre, simply because cows only have one calf. Sheep have an average of almost two lambs at their side. So you got quite a bit more legs and feet moving around there. I think I'm getting a little late, you guys, and I'm sorry about that.
Dave, while you're waiting for the slide to load, and that this is kind of what's going on for Dave, is that he is not able to see the slides that you all are seeing. There is a question about your lambs and if they're born on pasture or in the barn.
Oh, great question. Yeah, we lamb in April, and in April there's still snow and cold weather, and so we lamb all of our lambs in the barn. Um, in the month of April, we generally get done lambing in 40 days, and so there are all shed lambed. They go through a series of jugs and mix pens in that barn, in the lambing barn, and after about a week of being in the barn in 3 different pens to mother them up well, we turn them out into a corral for the rest of the month of April and part of May, and then everybody goes out. Usually it's about the 7th or 10th of May. We were a little late this year because of the cold spring. Okay, and the other big thing besides high stock density and long rest periods is managed residual. The top picture here demonstrates what we're trying to do. We're taking half, eating half, and we're leaving half. And so this is the paddock just after we turn the sheep into it. This is what the paddock looks like 24 hours later. Notice that mat of grass that we're trampling. That grass is going to be ate by the microbes. We're feeding the microbes there with all that carbon that's just in the form of trampled leaves and stems. So those are the 3 rules: long rest periods, high stock density, and managed residual. We monitor our fields, our pastures, like I said, this is a picture of the NRCS grazing hoop. It's a set circumference, and it's got a formula associated with that circumference, and you just cut that grass inside the hoop, weigh it with a gram measurement scale, and put it in a bag. If you want to take a forage sample, just use that bag to send it off to the lab. I also use a grazing stick here, and if I know, say, that the dry matter yield per acre is just say 4,800 pounds of dry matter per acre, it's generally going to be in that 24 inches measured along the grazing stick from the very bottom of the plant to the top of the plant. That's where I measure them. And it's about 200 pounds of dry matter per inch. So a lot of times I will go through the pasture just with my grazing stick and just measure how tall the grass is, and that gives me a pretty good estimate of what the hoops would have yielded. This picture on the right here is kind of interesting to me. This was taken in 2016, and we were fertilizing at that time down to just 36 pounds per acre, or 72 kilograms per acre per hectare or acre. Um, I apologize, I didn't get those metric uh, measurements converted. I did give this webinar to a bunch of New Zealand grazers also, and that's kind of a leftover thing. But uh, what is really neat about this, you see, that is a strip where we fertilized, and the story behind that is it was about the first week of July, and I thought I really needed to fertilize, and so I went and got a fertilizer tote buggy, and of course you always ask them if it works, and they'll say they assure you it works. So I went and got it, and about halfway through fertilizing our whole pasture, I realized it was only throwing the pellets out 25 feet instead of 50, but I was making 50-foot passes. And so I didn't realize that till I was about 2/3 of the way done through the field. And I was kind of mad at the fertilizer outfit, but what could I do? So I just kept going the way I was, fertilizing on 50-foot centers, knowing that only 25 feet were actually getting fertilized. This picture was taken about a month after I fertilized, and it was taken on the worst soil that we have. And you can see there's strips. There's lime green where it says 0 pounds of N and 72 pounds of N per acre. It's a nice, good green. But the kicker was on all the other acres, but about this 1.5 acres, all the other acres, there was no strips. Could not tell where I'd fertilized and where I had it. So that was a signal to me that we were ready to go off fertilizer. It was completely unintentional. You might say accidental, but it was kind of a key point in our transition. So, how much organic matter do you need to start tall grass grazing and start transitioning off of N fertilizer? In general, our pastures average 4.7. But we had a small pasture. It was only 2.5 acres that was in dairy corrals for 30 some years. It started out at 1% soil organic matter. And after 6 years of tall grass grazing, 4 of those years we transitioned just by cutting the fertilizer by half every year. And then 3 years was no fertilizer. It's now up to, in 2018, it was up to 4.3%. So it just demonstrates what you can do with tall grass grazing and regenerative practices to your soil organic matter. It's not going to take you centuries like we used to think to improve your organic matter level in your pastures. So challenges. First thing is fencing. Developing a fencing system. It's going to cost some money. If you're grazing, just say I was grazing continuously, I would have had to put up, a perimeter fence if it wasn't there already, and then I would have had to bought a bunch of temporary fencing. So what we use for temporary fencing is nets, these electric nets that are designed for sheep and goats. And all it is it looks like a volleyball net, or I mean a tennis net, but it's all electric. It's all hot with stainless steel strands in it, and it keeps coyotes and dogs and wolves out of the sheep pasture, and it keeps the sheep in. So it's very, very effective as long as you have enough electricity in it, and you need to have about 5,000 volts. So these things have pretty much revolutionized multi-paddock grazing for the sheep and goat industry. Because they serve those two function of keeping predators out and the sheep in, and you can move them really fast. We make a new paddock every day. It takes us about 45 minutes to take up 3 nets and then move them forward to make a new paddock and put them down in the ground again, and it takes probably 30 seconds to move the sheep. They know the program, and so uh, uh, so 45 minutes of my time is all I need to move these sheep every day. Glad to do it. I can observe the sheep, see how they're doing, see if anybody's lame, see if anybody's sick. They're they're usually following last when we move them through the gate, and a gate is just made by where one net starts and the other one stops. So gates are just made very easily just with the nets. And of course, if you're moving every day, uh, you can fence off less area, right? Because you're only going to be in there for 24 hours, so it takes less nets and less time per day to fence off your sheep than it would be if you were giving them 4 or 5 days or a week. Take a lot more nets and a lot more of your time. There's a question that just came up. What is your deworming program now? What we do is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with FOMACHA scoring, but we use FOMACHA scoring, and what that does is it quantifies the degree of anemia when you look at the lower eyelid of a lamb or a ewe. And so it's on a scale from 1 to 5, and 1 and 2 are nice, red, healthy looking mucous membranes in that lower eyelid, and a 5 is white colored, and a 5 is darn near dead from anemia, because the barber pole worm sucks blood. And so that's what the FOMACHA scoring keys on, is just the degree of anemia that is in the sheep or a goat or a llama or an alpaca. So what we do from that scoring is anything that scores a 3, 4, or 5 um, is anemic, and we deworm those sheep. Generally, it's only 25, maybe 30% of your flock uh, is that anemic, and so what we're doing is what they call a refugia. We create a refugia because we're not deworming every last sheep, and so by not deworming them all, we're leaving a lot of parasites, a lot of barber pole worm that aren't very good at what they do, and we worm the ones that are good at what they do, but there's always about 2 or 3% of them that the dewormer will not kill, and so they mate with the ones that are not very good worms, and so it allows your dewormer to work for you a lot longer. So we talked about this moving often. You need less nets. It increases your grazing efficiency, because if you move every day, say, and you have a 42-day rest period, 41 days of that 42 days rest period, the grass is allowed to grow without being ate upon. If you're at, say, 2 week, 14 days, you only get 27 days of growth. So that is what a grazing efficiency is. So you're maximizing the time that that grass plant can grow um, without being ate. It also decreases parasites, because it takes 4 days for the barber pole worm to get out of the fecal pellet and crawl up onto the grass leaf. And so if you're out of there before 4 days, you've just missed the latest crop of parasite larvae. So it's pretty cool that way too.
So I'll also say that we had a webinar series earlier this year that featured one of Dave's colleagues, Linda Coffey, all about parasites and kind of looking for ways to manage and defeat them with your sheep. And I will send along links to those webinars for folks that didn't catch them the first time around when I follow up with you all tomorrow.
Right, and the neat thing about that, Larissa, is that the same rules that will apply to tall grass grazing, long rest periods, short duration grazing periods, and leaving behind significant residual. Those are the same 3 rules that will decrease your parasite load. So it's really cool how those two things dovetail right into each other. This is just how we run our stock water. It's an above ground supply. It's just for our 32 acres, we've got about 2,000 feet of just 3/4 inch black poly pipe. It runs right on the surface. We don't trench it down or anything. And because of that, we can just put a hose bib in that black poly anywhere we want to. And so we can put a little stock water, a temporary stock water, right like this, anywhere we want in our pasture. So that's a big, big plus for us. When we started, if we had to guess how many stock water positions we would want in the 32 acres of pasture and bury the pipe with a backhoe or a ripper, we probably would have picked maybe several positions to come up with a riser and put a hose bib on it. Um, what we have now in our 32 acres, we probably have 20, 21, 22 um, spots where we can put a temporary water. The temporary water is just a 30-gallon plastic barrel cut in half, and it's just plumbed in with a hose. Has a float on it. Although these floats don't work so well in such a small water trough, so I just turn the water on so it just overflows that little trough, maybe half a gallon a minute at the most, and it just runs off into the ground and goes back to our well. So it's cycling through. This system is good down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit if you let the water run. So if you shut it off and you had a float on it, it would freeze a long time before zero. But we can pretty much count on it being a viable system down to 0 degrees for at least a week. So we're running this stock water system clean into November, 1st of December, and without it freezing. And by that time, we usually have snow, and sheep eat snow, so we're good for the rest of the grazing in the winter. So, challenges. We've already talked about parasites a bit, and they are a big challenge. However, as I was speaking to that question that was so nicely posed, the same rules for tall grass grazing, to incorporate that into your grazing system, they just dovetail perfectly for limiting the amount of parasites that are ingested from your pasture. I would like to ask how many of you guys have problems with the barber pole worm. Um, I can't, but I'm assuming that if you're in a intensively managed system, one of these days you're going to end up with the barber pole worm as being a major management criteria. So we beat the barber pole worm. The other system that we use is we talked about FOMACHA scoring first and then deworm. That really gives your dewormer a long life. Grazing strategies, which we talked about, daily moves, or at least moving every 3 to 4 days, and a long rest period, and lots of residual left. I try to at least leave 8 inches. I'm usually leaving a lot more than that. And then you can also select within your ewes to be resistant to the barber pole worm. It has a fairly high inheritance, this resistance, and so in 3 or 4 generations, you can really make a lot of progress just by selecting for ewes and that are resistant to the barber pole worm. And then one thing that we learned too, fence line weaning. Uh, we just have been using this strategy for I think the 4 years now. Um, what this does is it just really decreases the stress on those lambs, which are on the left-hand side of this picture, uh, of weaning. I mean, when they're out at 100 days of age, that old ewe is not producing very much milk. We all know that, but there's that kinship there between the lamb and the mother. That's a strong bond, and if you break that bond just directly, you're going to put a lot of stress on that lamb. Being a guy, my wife would say, those lambs were hollering at each other for a week. She says, "Man, that's a lot of stress." And I would say, "Oh, they can take it." I couldn't have been further wrong. We were recommend doing this to prevent stress and to limit the barber pole worm infection. And I can tell you, it is one of the best things we've ever done. We we wean them. It's usually 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon that we get everybody weaned from the ewes. We put the lambs on one side of this woven wire fence here. It's permanent fence. They can't get through it, and the ewes on the other. And the lambs are happy. Mom's right close to them. You can see those lambs are eating. They got their heads down. The ewes are eating. They got their heads down. Everything's hunky dory in sheepville, you know. And we go out the next morning or that night, about 8 or 9 o'clock at night to check the sheep, and there might be 30 or 40% of the ewes hollering for their lambs, just judging by sound. But there's probably only 10%, maybe 15% of the lambs answering. They're happy. Go by the next morning, it's even less hollering. The next night, there's pretty much silence there. We take the lambs away from the ewes about 36 hours after we fence line wean them here. And we just take the dog in and just gently move the lambs away from the ewes, and there's hardly a sound. So it just is a huge reducer of stress, and stress is very much influences very much the amount of infection that you get post weaning by the barber pole worm. We used to have about 220 cases of where 220 lambs on multiple lambs. A lot of them were where they were a 3, 4, or 5 on the FAMACHA scored, and we score every 2 weeks post weaning for 3 times or 6 weeks. And we used to have like 200, 210, 220 lambs that we deworm over that 6 week period. Again, a lot of them were reinfected, but now since we've fence line weaned, we're down to 60 over that 6 week period. So I know it's not a scientific research study and replicated controls and all that business, but to me, those figures are significant, and we're going to keep doing it. It works very well. The biggest challenge is me. We all have to get over the hump of trying something new and getting over the hump of saying it's never going to work for me when you hear it works for somebody else. We all have that tendency, and I had the beneficial situation where the risk of trying this was less for me because I had an outside job. And so if this thing didn't work, like my brother-in-law had told me it would not work, uh, I could just, I could weather the storm because I had another source of income. So if you have a farm that is your sole source of income, um, I would recommend starting small. Start it on 5 or 10% of your place, and transition. Never just go cold turkey on it because it's going to be hard if you do. You're going to run up a bunch of challenges. The biggest of which is your grass may not grow like you need it to do to support your flock or your cattle herd. So transition, and 4 years is what Christine Jones told me to do, and I basically just followed her recipe. I cut the 160 units of N to 72 the first year. I left it at that the second year. The third year I cut it down to 36, and the fourth year we did not apply nitrogen and haven't since. So do transition. And the other thing that's really important is have some integrity. Commit to this tall grass grazing program, and for at least 7 years. We did it in 4 years, but we had a fairly high amount of organic matter in our soil. But that's the common denominator that I hear people talking about it, is it's easy to bail because you might come up against challenges. Your grass may not grow, like you want it to. Give it a little bit of fertilizer, but don't just dump as much fertilizer as you've been using in previous years. Give it some time and monitor. You got to figure out, you got to know what's going on out there. Monitor your production, monitor your forage and what you have in your grass as far as nutrients. And then When you see the results from your monitoring, adapt to what you see out there for your problems. And one of the biggest things we learned was solve problems with biology, not chemistry. Examples of that is fence line weeding. We had a big problem with barber pole worm. Uh, we solved a huge percentage of that problem just by fence line weeding. Another thing is if you're lacking nutrients in your soil to accomplish this nutrient cycling, consider compost and compost teas. They work very well. So the last thing I want to leave you with is enjoy the freedom of not having to fertilize, of not having to put so much labor into growing grass, and that that time that you have saved is just so important to us now. I mean, my wife and I are in our 60s, and we've kind of gotten away from the thing of wanting to just work so hard on our farm every day no matter what. We enjoy the freedom of having 3 or 4 days a week that we don't have to move irrigation pipe. What do? We take, 2 or 3 days and go camping. You know, that option was never afforded us in our old system. Whether we wanted to or not, my wife would say, "Man, can't we go camping for a couple days?" And my answer was, "Boy, honey, I've got to move pipes the next 2 days, or else the grass won't grow. It won't be as high as we need it to be 30 days from now." So my wife and I are really enjoying the freedom that this system of regenerative and tall grass grazing gives us. Now, I think I really thank you guys for staying on. I think we've got almost as much people as we started with, and I know I ran over by quite a bit. So I really thank you. And I think we've got a few questions. Is that right, Larissa?
Yep, I'm just gonna forward through. Um, your contact information is here. There are a bunch of resources that you've mentioned, and I will also send out in our follow-up email tomorrow. And we do probably have time for just a couple questions. And if we don't get to your question tonight, Dave is very accessible. And he's very open to questions and follow up after the webinar. So there were quite a bit that came in. So let me ask you this, Dave. The question was, what grasses are best for tall grass grazing? Can you make any kind of generalizations?
Yeah, I would say in general, whatever your area is, I know we have a big diversity in climate in this audience, and there's I'm sure some of you that can grow cool season grasses and warm season grass. Maybe there's some of you like us that cannot grow warm season grasses because our temperatures are just too cold. I would recommend, going and visiting with your local NRCS staff. Um, that's how we started out. Um, uh, Actually, what happened to us, we started milking cows in '82, and the first year it was an alfalfa field, and the first year we tried to hay it, we didn't have any equipment. It was all who we could get to do it, and it was just a roaring disaster. We could not get that. It took us 6 weeks to get our first cutting up, and by that time it was basically straw. And so, we went that winter and we talked to our local, at that time is the Soil Conservation Service agent, and he recommended a grass mix for us, and it happened to be uh, a lot of the grasses that we're still using today. What we use in our area is uh, a meadow brome grass. It's called Regar meadow brome, but there's several varieties of meadow brome grass. It was bred for the northern tier states. It's very tough grass. It does not winter kill very easily. It has slightly less TDN than a grass like orchard grass. Um, but it regrows very fast. We also have orchard grass mixed into that mix. I really like a mix rather than just a solid stand of one grass. There's also uh, Garrison creeping foxtail in our pasture mix. And there's also a wheatgrass that came in that I don't even know the name of. It's probably occupies 20 to 30% of our pastures. And there's a little bit of quackgrass, which is
Mhm.
basically a weed in our country. It is very high in nutrition, but it just doesn't give you any yield. Um, so luckily, we don't have very much quackgrass in our pastures, but we have not reseeded a large part of our pastures for 20 years now.
Mhm.
That we did have about 5 acres that was probably about 40 or 50% quackgrass, and 6 years ago we did plow that up and reseed it. We were in a position where we just felt like we had to do something, even though we really didn't want to plow it up, but we had to do something. So we just, it's a good example. Sometimes you're forced into situations where you don't want to do it, but you have to do something. We couldn't, you can't get rid of quackgrass unless you spray it out in the fall, and then you have to plow up and reseed in the spring. So we have 5 grasses. I would certainly recommend trying to get 4 or 5 grasses in your mix. And also, what we're really trying to do is getting 30 or 40% of our grass stand or of our pasture stand into legumes.
Mhm.
It's really hard for us to do that without plowing things up, and we're not going to plow things up. So we're trying to top dress it and get it going that way. It's a slow game, though. What we're planting for legumes is white clover. Alice is the variety. Red clover. We're putting some bird's foot in, bird's foot trefoil, and some uh, vetch. Um, so those are the species that we're trying. There's 4 or 5 of them, and if I was planting new, I'd plant 3 or 4 at least different kinds of of legumes too, including alfalfa. When you have alfalfa in a mix, they're not going to bloat like they will if they're just if it's a solid stand. That's the neat thing about diversity in your pastures is you get away from a lot of problems with that you might have with legumes, the bloat problem. So that's what I'd recommend. I'd recommend going to your NRCS staff, and if you're in a particular county where for some reason or another they're not satisfying you, I'd just go to another county till I found one that was answering what I wanted. They're working for you, and you're paying them through your taxes, so use them.
Oh, there you
Use
go.
the ATTRA program, use your county extension agent. There's lots of resources. Those are the 3 main resources that I use is I use the ATTRA program, my county extension agent, and the NRCS staff.
Great advice, Dave. And I know, so I'm going to just forward to the next slide. Just because we need to wrap this up. But I know that there were quite a few questions we didn't get to that were either specific to your operations or that you just needed, people were asking for some more information about what was presented. And um, I will be CCing Dave on the follow-up email, so you'll have his contact information, and I'll try to also forward him the copies of the questions that came in today, so that he has those as well. I do have just a few housekeeping items before we sign off. As a reminder, immediately after this webinar, there is a very brief survey. And if you could just take a moment to tell us about your experience, we would really appreciate it. It helps us improve for the future. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be available. These documents will be archived on our website, and I'm going to be sending out an email to you all in the morning with quite a few links to those webinars, past webinars, and some of the resources that Dave mentioned. I also want to just give a quick plug for some of our Facts Other Farmer services. You're invited to join us for our webinar coming up next week. Dr. Mark Renz with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's going to be with us to share weed management strategies to improve your pastures. And I do want to mention that if you have specific plants that you would like help identifying, we are accepting photos in advance of the webinar. So please visit our website for more information about that. In case you haven't heard, we are accepting applications for our annual round of Fund a Farmer grants. The deadline is December 2nd, so there is still quite a bit of time. I'll be sure to include links to our upcoming webinars and more information about the grants in my follow-up email tomorrow. So Dave, do you have any parting thoughts before we close this webinar?
Well, I just want to thank you, Larissa, in fact, for letting me come on, and I sure want to thank all of you attendees. I know we ran over, and I really want to thank your interest and for supporting me. And I promise if you email me any of your questions, I will answer them.
Dave is wonderful. He is a true resource to take it. Well, I would say take advantage of, but that sounds bad. But that is all the time we have for today. It really has been a pleasure to have you with us, Dave, and thanks for sharing your experience and your insight and taking the time to answer our questions now and later. I'd also like to thank everyone out there in the audience for sticking around and for your interest and attention this evening. I hope that we see you on another webinar again very soon. So have a great evening and goodbye for now.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.